It's good day to brew, baby. What is up, YouTube? It's what Millsy. Back with Hometown Commander. Back for another episode of Millsy Brews, the show where I brew my version 1.0 deck list with the commander in front of us on my quest to brew the magic world. As always, the deck link for the deck list is going to be down in the description below, as well as I would greatly appreciate if you could interact with the video, like, comment, subscribe, do all those YouTube things. I would appreciate it. Today we are finishing out Bloomburrow Pre-Con Week with my brew for Mrs. Bumbleflower. A Bant Rabbit Citizen 1-5 with Vigilance says whenever you cast a spell, target opponent draws a card, put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. It gains flying until end of turn. And if it's the second time this ability is resolved this turn, you draw 2 cards. I think this is a very interesting commander for a couple of reasons. One, whenever you cast a spell, target opponent draws a card, put a counter on target creature, it gains flying until end of turn, happens every time you cast a spell. And that is an interesting ability because you're handing your opponent cards. I've always believed this to be slightly dangerous, right? Because you don't want to hand your opponent too many cards, especially if they're playing, depending on what decks they're playing. But we do certainly want to put counters on creatures. That's a great ability and something we can really take advantage of. And we can then draw 2 cards on the second cast. I think this is something where we can offset it and take real advantage. And I'll warn you that we're in the perfect color combination to pay off drawing cards and pay off counters. I think this deck has the threat to be a threat and not what people expect to happen. And we can set up a ton of value on opponents. We're going to talk about our draw payoffs, we're going to talk about our counter payoffs, and we're going to talk about how we're going to try to be the beatdown. And I think it's not hard with this deck if we can get it set up to threaten our opponents in a lot of really fun ways. But first, let's talk about our draw payoffs, right? So first spell, opponent draws a card, counter, flying. Second spell, we draw 2. So as long as we cast 2 spells in a turn, we're automatically drawing 3 cards, right, in our turn. 1 at the start, 2 there. So all of these draw your second card on each turn effects are going to be easy to do that. But not only that, but we have other effects that are going to draw us cards. So drawing cards is something that's important to us. We get to play one of my favorite blue commanders of all time, which hurts my heart to say as a green player, but Teferi Temporal Pilgrim, a 5-mana 4 loyalty planeswalker that says whenever you draw a card, you put a loyalty counter on Teferi. You pay 0 to draw a card, -2 to get a 2/2 spirit that gets a +1/+1 counter every time you draw a card. And the -12 effectively does a Cyclonic Rift to one person. It's a brutal effect, but the truth about Teferi that I like so much is because we have so many abilities that are going to draw us cards when counters go on, or we're going to play around with these two things, and they coexist so well. Teferi's going to get big, the spirits are going to get big, and it's going to be a powerhouse of value. Alondra and Jor-El both make a token when we draw our second card each turn. Alondra lets us give all of those Drakes +X/+X, where X is the number of cards in their hand when we draw our 5th card each turn. And Jor-El for 6 mana can just make all of our creatures base power toughness XX, where X is the number of cards in hand. When you start to see how big we can make our creatures with counters in a deck like this and how many cards we can have in our hand and draw, these abilities are not that far out of reach and not as bad as you think they are. We'll add in Min, Wily Illusionist, where we draw our second card each turn and make a 1/1 illusion with it gets +1/+1 for each other illusion we control. And then Min adds a really fun effect to the illusions that whenever they die, you may put a permanent with mana value less than or equal to that creature's power from your hand onto the battlefield. The ability to cheat in things when those illusions die can be very good, as long as we can protect Min and allow her to do that for them. Mr. Foxglove, the alternate commander, seems like a ton of fun. Whenever it attacks, we draw cards equal to the number of cards in defending player's hand minus the number of cards in our hand. And if we didn't draw cards, we could put a creature card from our hand onto the battlefield. This ability is great if we're down on cards. It's going to refill our hand. That's more draws that are going to count for our effects. And if not, we just put a creature from our hand on the battlefield and take real value. And if we have no other good place to put the +1/+1 counters, Mr. Foxglove does have lifelink, meaning we can gain some life back that way. Toski feels great. Whenever a creature we control deals common damage to a player, we draw a card, way to draw more cards. And Toski is indestructible and must attack, but that's okay. The point is, drawing cards on damage is never a bad thing. Wedding Ring seems like a really fun card for a deck like this. It's a card that doesn't see a ton of play, but I feel like it's great for us because it can actually pay us back for handing other people cards if we're going to draw 2. So it says, whenever an opponent who controls an artifact named Wedding Ring draws a card during their turn, we draw a card. Well, I'm just realizing that Wedding Ring doesn't work the way did. But that's okay. That's neither here nor there. Wedding Ring is still good. Still going to draw us cards when an opponent draws cards and can still fulfill effects that we have. On the trail, where we draw our second card each turn, we could put a land card from our hand on the battlefield tapped. And then Teferi Aegis Insight, whenever we draw a card, except for the first one we draw each turn, draw 2 cards, it's dead, meaning that Bumbleflower should go up to 3 cards drawn off instead of 2 with Teferi, unless I'm doing that math wrong in my head. But those are our draw payoffs. Let's talk about counters. So Bumbleflower is giving us a counter every time we cast a spell. Well, a great combo off the rip is something like Danny Pink. Creatures you control have whenever one or more counters are put on this creature for the first time each turn, draw a card. Well, put a counter on, draw a card, and now we're doing everything we want to right away. Dusk Legion's Duelist says the first time one or more counters are put on it each turn, draw a card. So here we go. It has Vigilance. It's not a bad body, but again, drawing us cards with things going on. We get fun ways to interact with the counters like Evolution Witness. Whenever one or more counters are put on it, we can return target permanent card from our graveyard to our hand. It's a fun, repeatable way to get things back and keep them in our hand that way. Nil's Disciple Enforcer is another fun way to play around with the counters. At the beginning of your end step, for each player, put a +1/+1 counter on up to 1 target creature that player controls, and each creature with one or more counters on it can attack you or planeswalkers you control, unless his controller pays X, where X is the number of counters on that creature. Remember, Bumbleflower doesn't have to put the counters on our creatures. It can put it on anyone. We could pair with Nils to make things harder to attack us, but I think we want them on ours more than we want them on our opponents. Rishkar comes in and puts a counter on each up to 2 target creatures, and each creature we control with a counter on it can tap for green mana. Great ability and can be helpful if we spread those counters out to our entire board. Stillbird Champion is a 1/1 with Vigilance that we can make a second copy of get another copy of with Offspring. Whenever opponent casts a non-creature spell, we put a counter at. Steelbird Champion can get big, and it has a Vigilance, so it can be both a great attacker and a great blocker. We have 20 Toad from the Precon, another fun an alternate win con. Whenever we attack with 2 or more creatures, we put a counter on it and draw a card. And whenever it attacks, we win the game if there are 20 or more counters on it, or if we have 20 or more cards in hand. A fun card, and can be a threat to our opponents for sure. Innkeeper's Talent from the main set feels like a great add here. At the beginning of our combat on our turn, we can put a counter on a creature we control. On level 2, all of our permanents with counters on them have Ward 1. Great way to protect our board that way. And we get up to level 3, we get that Branching Evolution style effect. Whenever we put 1 or more counters on a permanent or player, put twice that many on there instead. So get more and more counters that way. And then another alternate win con in Simic Ascendancy. Whenever 1 or more counters are put on a creature you control, put that many growth counters on Simic Ascendancy. And at the beginning of your upkeep, if it has 20 more growth counters on it, we win the game. So 20 Toad, and Simic Ascendancy. Just some of these fun alternate win con ways to win the game with these counters that we're going to be getting when we use Bumbleflower's ability. But I think at the end of the day, we don't just want to profit from drawing and getting counters. At some point, we want to be the beatdown, and there's a lot of ways we can do this. The deck gets to play 3 of some of my favorite creatures from Khans of Tarkir in Obzin Battle Priest, Obzin Falconer, and Tuskguard Captain, which we'll see on the next slide. Each of them have Outlast to put counters on themselves, but they all have the same, very similar ability. Each creature with you control the +1/+1 counter on it has blank. Battle Priest gives them all lifelink, Falconer gives them all flying, and Tuskguard, that we'll see on the next slide, gives them all trample. Strictly means that all of our creatures are going to get threatening to our opponents because they're going to be better than just creatures that have counters on them. They can have evasion with flying, help keep us alive better with things like lifelink, or hit hard with trample like the Tuskguard Captain. Champion Lambholt feels like a great payoff here. Creatures with power less than Lambholt's power can't block creatures we control. And whenever another creature comes in, we put a counter on Lambholt. Well, we just need to get Lambholt bigger enough so it's the biggest creature on board and our opponents cannot block us. And, well, we get to just go off to the races attacking. Sovereign Akaneka How is another fun way to do it. Whenever it attacks, for each creature you control with power greater than its base power, put a number of counters on it equal to the difference. The cool part is those creatures don't have to attack, just Akaneka has to attack, meaning that it could just start spreading counters around more, get more of those counter triggers to go off, and just have a ton of fun. It's one of those cards from Mixelon that's fast to become one of my favorite cards from the set, and it sees another great spot here. But I've said it before on the show, and I'll say it again. No deck's ever complete. This is my version 1.0 version of the list. And I think there's a lot of things we can learn in testing. And these are the 3 cards that I think would be my most likely to consider pulling back in as we test it. The first is something like Inspiring Call. Draw a card for each creature with a counter on it, and those creatures get indestructible. We are playing protection in the deck, don't get me wrong. But I like the idea of drawing and having the protection as well. Could be kind of interesting, or could be something we do on our main phase or in our turn to just draw a few extra cards and take a big attack. Noble Heritage kind of plays around with this similar ability to Nils that we talked about, where Bumbleflower would then have, as long as it's out, as long as Heritage is out, when this creature enters or at the beginning of our upkeep, each player may put up to 2, may put 2+1/+1 counters on a creature they control. For each opponent who does, you get protection from that player until your next turn. And that's pretty cool because then you basically can just protect yourself from that player. And now, I'll give the people out there asking it the credit. Not everyone's going to take those counters, but you're giving them the option to, and I think more players are going to take it than you think they will, and they may not want to take it, but they may choose to take it, and that can protect us for 1 or 2 turns when we can build our board up. And then Psychic Corrosion, where we draw a card, each opponent mills 2. And I mean, that's just helpful. Help mill our opponents out, get through their things. Of course, it's going to hurt when we play into graveyard decks, but I think it could be worth it against most decks. But let's get into our playtest like we love to do on the show. Let's see the deck in action, try to do our best. Keeping a 3-lander with a Rampant Growth, Path to Exile. Communal Brewing is a card that I absolutely love the look of. When it enters, any number of target opponents each draw a card, and we put an ingredient counter on it for each one that does. The cool part is it's not their choice. You just choose whether or not they draw a card. And then it says when you cast a creature spell, it enters with X additional +1/+1 counter on it, where X is the number of ingredient counters on it. Effectively meaning that all of our creatures now come in with 3 +1/+1 counters on it. I love this card. It is great. And then Tameo that was in the precon. Eventually the -7 can get us to where we can pay nothing to cast spells from our hand. Turn 1, we draw that Champion Lambholt. We will happily take it. I think all we're missing is white mana, but we can get there with that Rampant Growth, so I'm not too worried about it. Turn 2, we'll play the island and use that Rampant Growth. Bumbleflower is 4, so this actually does push us towards playing it or something else. But I think we just go get the white source there, so that way we have all the colors we need. Put the forest, so this could be a turn 3 Bumbleflower, or we could set up something like Communal Brewing. I think it makes more sense to set up Bumbleflower so that way next turn we can be using its ability. So turn 4, we want to try to get a couple casts here from its ability if we can, right? At the moment, the only target I have for the counter is itself. But we could, like, let me think about this. I like the idea of the Brewing, because the Brewing works really well with Lambholt. So let's do that. On the cast, we'll give Bumbleflower the counter and flying, and then we'll have everybody draw a card. And it'll come in with 3 counters on it. So every creature we have is coming in with 3 +1/+1 counters. And I would just leave, let's see, logic would dictate probably I leave Path to Exile up over Pongified just in case. But I'd leave the removal up. I don't really want to play it because it's going to hand out another card to somebody at the moment. But if something really needs removed on turn 4, we have to do it. Turn 5, we don't draw the land, which kind of stinks. I was really hoping to get 5 mana here to maybe play Lambholt and maybe something like that, a Simic Ascendancy we just drew. But, I mean, we could play the Sphere. We could go Sphere into Simic Ascendancy, which is always an option. Play the Sphere, put a counter on Bumbleflower, give it flying. Play the Simic Ascendancy. That would draw us 2. And another counter on Bumbleflower. There we go. We got our land for turn. And now that happens on cast, so the Simic Ascendancy wouldn't actually see the counters go onto it. But this sets us up for next turn, where maybe we could play multiple creatures and put some for the Ascendancy. So turn 6 here, we have the Simic Ascendancy online and that Communal Brewing. I would go ahead and get Lambholt down on cast, right? We have to put the counter on Bumbleflower. She's our only creature. Give somebody a card. That's going to add a counter to Simic Ascendancy. Now Bumbleflower's in the air this turn. Then Lambholt comes in, getting 3 counters because of the Communal Brewing, which is going to put this up to 4 counters. And now you can start to see that Simic Ascendancy is going to become a threat. Here I would probably just... I mean, Kutzel or Tuskard seems like a great choice. Kutzel seems good because it could draw us another card this turn, because Bumbleflower is now in the air. And this would stop people from playing things on our turn. We could also leave up the removal. But I think I would just probably cast Kutzel. On cast, I'm going to put the counter on Bumbleflower. Counter on Simic Ascendancy. Then Kutzel comes in. We get a counter on Lambholt, which puts a counter on the Ascendancy. We get 3 counters on Kutzel because of Communal Brewing, which puts 3 more counters on Ascendancy. And then I realized actually we have 1 mana up for Pongify or Rapid with the Commander's Spirit. But now we are halfway on Simic Ascendancy. That draws us 2. And then we can get our land for turn there. But now Bumbleflower takes an attack. He's 6-10 in the air this turn. That's just going to hit somebody with Vigilance. And nobody can block it if their creatures are, you know, or if are 5 or less. So Bumbleflower is probably getting here this turn. And now next turn, and that draws us another card, sorry, because of Kutzel. But now this runs us the threat of just probably hitting pretty hard with something like Tuskard Captain. Let's do it. Turn 7. We'll put the Hedge Maze in tapped. Surveil 1, seeing Hinterland Harbor. We already play our land for a turn, so I think I'll probably just junk it here. Sitting with 7 mana again. Tuskard Captain is... Oh, jeez. What did I just do? Sorry about that, guys. Tuskard Captain is 3, so I like that. I also like the idea of something like Tamiya. But let's do Tuskard. On cast, we're going to put a counter on Kutzel. Opponent draws a card. Kutzel gets flying until end turn. That puts counter on Simic Ascendancy. Then Tuskard comes in. So that's counter on Lambholt, counter on Ascendancy. 3 counters here because of the Communal Brewing. 3 more counters on Ascendancy. And unfortunately, I don't have any way to give it haste. It would be really cool if I could, but that's okay. Let's think about this. So the next spell I cast is going to draw me 2 cards. I could cast Tamiya and draw some cards. Things come in, but I also could just try to get more counters down and try to potentially end the game next turn. So 4 mana left in 5. So I could put something like Sunscorch Regents, but let's do Dusk Legion Zealot. On cast, I'm going to put the counter on Bumbleflower to get it in the air. Counter on Simic Ascendancy. And then I'm going to draw 2, right? Zealot comes in. Counter on Lambholt. Counter here. 3 counters on the Zealot, which is going to draw me a card because of the Zealot. This goes up to 19. Draw a card off the Zealot. And now... we're like, what, 1 counter off of Simic Ascendancy, I think, right? If I did that correctly. We did 2, 5, 8 counters. Yeah, I think we're just 1 off the Simic Ascendancy. Mood to combat, I mean, we take the swing here. We have trample, but not only that, but we have unblockable probably at this point on almost everything. That's 7, 14, 21... 21 damage this turn. I'm pretty sure Tuskard came in this turn, but 21 damage this turn, and Bumbleflower might be threatening somebody with commander damage at this point. We would draw a couple more cards with Kutzel, but again, we dealt some big damage. Ascendancy's almost there, and I think we can kind of show what our goal here is, you know, at that point with that playtest. But let's move to a second one. 3-lander with Kami of the Whispered Ones, Sword of Plowshares, and a Akanega and a Offer You Can't Refuse some removal. Kami feels like a great mana dork here. Whenever 1 or more counters would be put on a permanent, we control, put that many +1. And then we can add X mana of any 1 color where X is its power. So this is going to work great with Bumbleflower to put more counters on it. Turn 1, I mean, let's see. Probably just put the Canopy Vista in tap. There's not really much else we can do here turn 1. Turn 2, get the Hinterland Harbor in untapped. I think Nature's Lore is probably my only real play here. We'll get the Tri-Land. and shuffle up. Turn 3, we are at the mana for Miss Bumbleflower, and I think that's what I'll... Let's see what this... Or do I want to get the Kami down and hold up, like, off your characters? I think I just want to get Bumbleflower down here and get that party started. Turn 4, no land, but that's okay, I guess, right? We'll deal with it. I guess I'll probably just cast the Akanek here, put a counter on Bumbleflower. This comes in, hit somebody for 2 in the air with flying. Now Akanek's set up for next turn, work can attack and start putting counters on things. So turn 5, ooh, I like Danny Pink. The only problem is that counter goes on from Bumbleflower before Danny comes in. I really think we need to set up something like Kami. So Kami comes down, put the counter on Akanek, get it in the air. It gains flying until end of turn. Somebody else draws a card. Now we have Kami adding more counters in the future. We've got 2 mana left, or a mana left. I'd probably just keep up the Plowshares and an offer. Attack with Sovereign, counter here, except, right, they get 2 because of the Kami. And now we have a great attack there. Sovereign's in the air, so that's 6 damage in the air. And then Bumbleflower is in the air, but it's a 4/8 with Vigilance. I'm not worried about on turn 5 it really being a threat of anything. Now, I mean, we can just continue to have some fun. 4 mana. We did leave an offer and Swords to Plowshares up. I mean, if I could have used either of them, I definitely would have and put the counters on Kami, right, so that it's worth more. So let's just say we countered somebody on something on somebody's turn, just to get those counters onto Kami to make it tap for more mana. So now this turn, now we're sitting with 7 mana. We have Season of Weaving. We can either draw a card for 1, choose an artifact or creature we control, make a copy of it for 2, or return each non-land, non-token permanent to its owner's hand for 3. So, I mean, we could make 2 copies of, like, the Kami, for example, and draw a card. I like Octomancer's a ton of fun, getting some tokens. I also like Danny Pink a ton. The only problem is I just don't have a really good way to use it just yet. I think what I would do is tap the Kami for 3, 4 and 5 for Mirari's Make. Mirari's Make's a great enchantment that gives a buff to all our creatures, but it lets our lands tap for 2 mana instead of 1. On that cast, I would put a counter on Bumbleflower, which again ends up being 2 because of Kami. Now we have 4 mana, right? And I think I would play... Well, playing Danny seems late here, right? Because I'm not going to get the draw this turn, but I guess I could get the draw next turn. I guess I'm drawing 2 cards anyway. Here, put the counters on Kami, and we draw 2, and then Danny comes in. I think we can play that Glacial Fortress, which is great because now we can hold up Swords to Plowshares. Now this is tapping for 5 next turn. We attack with Sovereign and Bumbleflower. Instead of Sovereign getting 3 counters, it's going to get 4, right? Because of Kami, and instead of Bumbleflower getting 5 counters, it's actually going to get 6. So that's 11. So now Bumbleflower is already flying this turn because we put the counters on a 12 in the air. So now Bumbleflower is a threat. And this is what I like about this deck is, like, Bumble getting in the air is going to become a threat to certain opponents they have to deal with. That actually draws us 2, I just realized, with Danny Pink because of its ability, right? And we just pass the turn, Sword to Plowshares up. We have the Flare up. I think I'd happily, as much as it would stink to do, I'd happily give up Akanek to protect this board and have all this mana for next turn. Get into the next turn here. I think this turn I would imagine be threatening to knock somebody out with Bumbleflower. If they took 12 last turn, I mean, I don't see a world where they don't get knocked out here. The first thing I want to do is get Narset down, because this is going to stop our opponents from drawing more than 1 card each turn, meaning we could, with basically the way that's working with Bumbleflower is we give them that first card, and then we go to give them that second card, and they don't draw it because of Narset. On the draw, I will put, I'll put 2 counters on Danny, which will draw me a card. So now Narset will shut off the next person that I go to give cards to. Whew, give them all lifelink seems pretty good to me. We'll tap 2 more and do the Battle Priest. I'll try to give that same person the card again, and they won't be able to draw it with Narset, but we will get to draw 2. and we'll put the counters on Kami, drawing us another card with Danny Pink. We would have what? It was 3 for Narset, floated 1. We got 1 floating, and we've got 5 mana left here, and then 7 mana for the Kamis. We got plenty of mana left, and now we're just going to continue to get pulse and pulse one counters and put things in the air. So we put Bumble in the air, and we put Danny and Kami in the air this turn. Love the idea of Wave Goodbye just to clear the way for us. I mean, Wave Goodbye could potentially end the game here. Let's get something like Arcane Signet down, put the counters on the Battle Priest, just so if we do Wave Goodbye, we're not hurting ourselves. That would draw us a card. 1, 2, so 7, 8, 9, 10 mana. Let's get what? I'm trying to think what I want to do here. Get the Talon in, put the counters on Akanek, right? Draw a card up Danny Pink. I'm just trying to get everything at least in the air, or get counters and everything so they get even more counters with Akanek when we do attack. Land for turn. So I think we've got just the mana from this and this one. Commander Sphere, put the counters on Bumbleflower, draw a card because of Danny Pink, and then I would just Wave Goodbye. Everything goes back to their opponent's hands. We'll put the counters on Danny, I guess, just to make it a little bit bigger. And then we just take a big attack here, and I have a gut feeling that Bumbleflower knocks somebody out that it didn't knock out already from commander damage, or if they're already low enough. I mean, I think at least one person knocks out here, and we're threatening somebody else. And I think we just have a great board state to keep going. But let me know, what do you think of my version of Bumbleflower? I like the deck. I think it's very interesting. The only thing I think I still can't get over is giving somebody else cards. To me is kind of dangerous, but I think if you can play that off, if you can make it work, and if you're not as opposed to it, I think this deck can be a ton of fun. As you can see, those counter and draw synergies just work so well together. But let me know what you think down in the comment section below, and I'll catch you guys next time.